In the heart of an old African village, there stood a tree that carried more than shade and roots, it carried whispers. At first, the villagers thought it was the wind, but soon, the whispers formed names, names of their own people. Whenever the tree spoke, death followed not long after. Fear spread quickly, and no one dared walk near it at night. But one evening, the tree whispered the name of a boy named Ife, a gentle child raised by his grandmother, Mama Adaku. Refusing to surrender him to fate, she set out to uncover the tree's dark secret before it was too late. What she discovered would change everything the village believed about life and death. Stay with us through this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Long before the tree became a thing of terror, it was simply part of the landscape of the village. It stood taller than the rooftops, its branches sprawling like a giant umbrella, and its roots pushing deep into the red earth that fed generations. To the children, it was a place of play where they raced in circles and climbed as high as their courage would allow. To the elders, it was a marker of time, a tree that had been there before their fathers were born. For everyone in the village, the tree was a silent companion until the whispers began. The first night was unremarkable. A breeze moved through the village, rustling the palm fronds and carrying the smell of burning wood from evening fires. But some swore that the wind sounded different when it brushed past the old tree. It was not just a rustle, it was softer, almost deliberate, like words trying to form. At first, no one paid attention. The villagers were used to strange sounds at night, the creaking of huts, the cry of distant animals, the wailing of the wind in the hills. Yet for a few who lingered awake, there was something unsettling about this particular sound. Among them was Mama Adaku, a woman whose sharp ears and wise eyes had seen many seasons come and go. She was returning from her nightly routine of pouring water over the clay pot in her yard to keep it cool. When she paused to listen, she felt a chill pass through her bones. The sound from the tree seemed to rise and fall in rhythm, like a whisper carried on the air. She shook her head, dismissing it as imagination. Yet, she could not forget it. The next day, when she mentioned it to her neighbor, the woman laughed and said it must have been the night birds nesting in the branches. But Mama Adaku was not convinced. As days turned into weeks, more villagers began to notice the same thing. Farmers returning late from the fields spoke of a low murmur as they walked past. Young men, on their way to the river at dawn, swore they heard voices, though none could agree on the words. Some avoided the tree altogether, especially at night, while others scoffed and said people were letting superstition guide their minds. Still, unease grew. The whispers did not stop. And though they were faint, they seemed purposeful, as though waiting for someone to truly listen. It was Ife, Mama Adaku's grandson, who first called attention to what he thought he heard clearly. He was only 13, curious and playful, and unlike the adults, he did not fear the tree. One evening, he told his grandmother that the tree was talking. She hushed him quickly, not wishing the other villagers to hear, for she knew how rumors spread like fire through dry grass. Yet, deep inside, her heart trembled. She remembered the night she first paused at that tree and felt its strange breath in the wind. Whatever was stirring within its ancient branches was not the song of birds or the sigh of leaves. It was something else, something that seemed to be reaching out from the unseen. And though the village had yet to realize the truth, this was only the beginning of a mystery that would touch every soul. As the days passed, what once seemed like a strange rustle in the tree began to take a clearer form. The whispers were no longer just sounds hidden in the wind. They were shaping themselves into names. At first, it happened quietly, almost as though the tree was testing who would notice. One evening, while families gathered around fires to share food and stories, a voice slipped through the air so faintly that only a handful of people turned their heads. They looked toward the tree and then at each other, uncertain if what they had heard was real. No one spoke of it openly, for who would admit to hearing a tree call out a person's name? But the whispers grew bolder. A young woman, carrying water from the stream after sunset, swore she heard the tree call the name of her father. She dropped the calabash and ran home breathless, insisting to her family that the tree had spoken. Her mother tried to calm her, but her voice shook as she told her not to repeat such things outside their walls. Others soon confessed similar experiences. An old man said he heard his brother's name as he walked by in the dawn mist. A group of boys swore the tree called the name of a hunter as they returned from the river. The villagers could not ignore it any longer. Mama Adaku listened carefully to all these whispers of fear, and though she tried to shield Ife from the growing tension, he noticed the way her eyes clouded whenever the tree was mentioned. He himself had begun to hear it more clearly. At night, lying on his mat, he would swear the voice carried through the air into the village, weaving into his dreams. To him, it was not frightening at first, it was fascinating, like a secret only he could understand. But his grandmother warned him sternly never to speak of it outside their home, for she knew the villagers would not be kind to a boy who claimed to understand the voice of a haunted tree. The whispers became the silent talk of the village. People lowered their voices when speaking of it, glancing nervously at the tree as though it might overhear. Some believed the ancestors were trying to communicate. Others thought an evil spirit had taken root in its branches. A few dismissed it as foolishness, but even they avoided walking too close after sunset. No matter the explanation, the truth was undeniable. The tree was not silent anymore. Then came the night that sealed the whispers into the heart of the village. As the moon rose high, its pale light spilling across the tree's twisted branches, the voice rose stronger than ever before. This time, everyone who was awake heard it. The name it called belonged to a man still alive, still breathing, still sitting by his fire. The villagers froze in disbelief. The tree had spoken, and it had chosen one of their own. What none of them knew was that this single name would soon mark the beginning of a chain of events that could not be undone. The man whose name the tree had whispered was Oba, a strong farmer known for his wide smile and his kindness in sharing food during the lean seasons. That night when the tree called him, he laughed nervously and told the others not to fear. He insisted that the wind had twisted their minds, that trees did not speak, and that no man's fate was bound to a sound in the night. The villagers tried to agree, but an unease settled in their hearts, for deep down, they all knew they had heard his name clear as day. Even Mama Adaku, who tried to calm her grandson, felt the heavy weight of certainty pressing on her chest. 2 days later, Oba did not return from the fields. When his neighbors went to search for him, they found him lying by the edge of his farm, his tools scattered, and his body still. There were no wounds, no sign of struggle, only the final stillness of death. His family wailed in grief, and the entire village gathered to bury him. Yet, behind their mourning faces, lay another terror. The tree had spoken his name, and now he was gone. The whispers spread quickly from house to house, growing in fear with each retelling. Some said Oba's spirit had been claimed by the tree. Others believed the tree was cursed, a punishment for some hidden sin among them. The elders debated in hushed voices, but none could explain how the tree had named Oba before death reached him. What had once been superstition was now reality. The villagers began to avoid the tree altogether, walking long distances around it even in the heat of day. Ife listened to the cries during Oba's burial and clutched his grandmother's hand tightly. For the first time, he felt the weight of fear sink into his young heart. He remembered the voice calling out clearly in the night, and though he had thought it mysterious before, he now understood its darkness. He whispered to Mama Adaku that he was afraid the tree would one day call his own name. She hushed him, but her trembling hands betrayed her calm words. That night, as the fires burned low and silence fell over the hut. The villagers lay awake, waiting, listening. No one wanted to hear the whispers, yet they strained their ears for fear of missing them. And when at last the tree stirred again, the sound came soft and measured, like a breath in the dark. It did not call a name that night, but the people knew it was only a matter of time. The first death had confirmed what none of them wished to believe. The tree did not whisper idly. Its voice carried the weight of fate, and where it spoke, death would surely follow. After Oba's death, no one could deny the power of the whispers. What unsettled the villagers most was not only that the tree had spoken his name, but that it had done so days before death came. When the tree murmured again, the people listened with pounding hearts, and sure enough, another name rose from its branches. This time it was the name of Chika, a midwife whose hands had delivered countless children into the world. Fear spread quickly, and though Chika tried to hide her trembling, she could not sleep that night. Within a week, she fell ill, her body weakening beyond what herbs or prayers could cure, and before the next moon, she too was gone. By now, the village was in turmoil. The people began to keep count, whispering to one another about who had been called and when. The pattern was undeniable. The tree spoke a name, and soon after, that person was claimed by death. Mothers pulled their children close. Men refused to pass near the tree even in daylight, and elders who once laughed at ghost stories now avoided looking in its direction. The once proud tree that shaded their paths had become a shadow over their lives. Mama Adaku listened in silence as villagers argued about what to do. Some demanded that the tree be cut down and burned to ash, believing that destroying it would end the curse. Others warned that striking it would anger the spirits further, bringing even greater misfortune. The elders hesitated, for they remembered old tales of the land, stories of blood and betrayal buried deep in history, though none would speak them aloud. To attack the tree was to risk war with whatever unseen force lived within it. Ife watched the fear spread like fire through dry grass. He noticed how the laughter of the village had grown quiet, how the once lively gatherings around the fires had turned into tense silences, broken only by uneasy glances toward the tree. Though he was still young, he could see what others refused to admit: the whispers were not random. They carried intention, as if the tree itself was choosing its victims. He wanted to ask his grandmother if the tree hated the village or if it was punishing them, but each time he looked into her weary eyes, he beat back the question. The fear deepened when people began to wonder whose name would be next. Every whisper felt like a death sentence, and with each passing day, the villagers walked as though a heavy hand pressed down upon them. They prayed, they sacrificed, they pleaded to the spirits, but nothing silenced the tree. When it called with certainty, and death followed without fail. What had begun as whispers in the wind had become a grim pattern that no one could escape, and the village lived in the constant dread of hearing their own name in the night. The whispers had already claimed the old and the strong, the wise and the needed, leaving the village paralyzed in fear. Each time the tree stirred with its low breath, hearts froze. For every villager knew what would follow. Some prayed it would never be their name, while others begged the spirits to spare their children. Yet nothing could have prepared them for the night the tree called a name that shook the village to its core. The voice rose clearer than it ever had before, slicing through the silence of the night, and this time it called for Ife. Ife was only 13, bright-eyed and restless, a boy who carried the innocence of childhood and the promise of becoming a man. He was beloved in the village, not only by his grandmother Mama Adaku, but by many who admired his quick laughter and his willingness to help with chores far beyond his years. To hear the tree whisper his name was like a cruel wound to the community. Children were not supposed to be taken by such things, for death had mostly claimed the elders and the weary. The people looked at one another with wide eyes, their faces pale in the moonlight, as the dreadful truth settled upon them. The tree did not care for age, nor innocence, nor promise. It chose as it pleased. Mama Adaku felt her body weaken when she heard the sound. She clutched her chest, whispering prayers into the night. begging the ancestors to take her instead. She knew the tree's whispers never lied, yet she refused to accept that her grandson's life would be cut short. That evening, she wrapped Ife in her arms, as if her embrace alone could shield him from fate. If, though trembling, tried to be brave. He asked his grandmother why the tree wanted him, but she had no answer. Only tears she tried to hide. The villagers spoke in hushed tones the following day, their fear mingled with sorrow. Some avoided Mama Adaku's home altogether, afraid that being near Ife meant standing too close to death. Others brought food quietly, unable to face her eyes, for they could not imagine the pain of waiting for death to claim a child. Rumors spread that the boy had been chosen for some greater reason, that perhaps he carried a spirit unknown to him, or that his family was cursed. Whispers of pity and suspicion trailed behind him wherever he walked. As the sun set and night fell once more, the village held its breath, waiting for the tree to whisper again. Mama Adaku, however, made a decision. She would not sit and wait for the tree to take her grandson. Ife was her blood, her only family left in this world, and she would not surrender him to shadows. She knew the elders feared the stories buried in the past, but she was ready to uncover what others had chosen to forget. If the tree had chosen her grandson, then she would face the tree itself, no matter the cost. From the moment the tree whispered Ife's name, Mama Adaku could no longer find rest. Sleep abandoned her, food lost its taste, and every beat of her heart carried the weight of dread. She sat by the doorway of her hut at night, staring at the shadow of the tree in the distance, her lips moving in endless prayers. For all her years and wisdom, she had never felt so powerless, yet love for her grandson drove her to a decision that others were too afraid to make. If the tree had chosen Ife, then she would uncover the reason. She would search for answers where others had chosen silence. The villagers noticed her determination and whispered about her in the same way they whispered about the tree. Some pitied her, believing grief had clouded her judgment. Others warned her not to meddle with forces beyond human reach, urging her to accept fate rather than stir the anger of spirits. But Mama Adaku had lived long enough to know when fear was blinding people. She had already lost children of her own, taken by illness and hardship, and Ife was all that remained of her blood. To lose him was to lose her very reason for living. She could not sit idly by and wait for death to knock at their door. One evening, she sat Ife down beside her and spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. She told him that he must stay close, that he must not wander near the tree no matter how curious he felt. She reminded him that he was stronger than he realized, that even though the villagers whispered about him as though he were already gone, his life was still in Allah's hands, not in the hands of a cursed tree. Ife listened quietly, his eyes wide, and though he wanted to believe her words, he could not shake the terror of hearing his own name carried on the wind. Mama Adaku sought out the oldest among the elders, those whose memories stretched back farther than the rest. She asked questions that others were too frightened to voice. Why the tree whispered, why death followed its call, and whether this had ever happened before. At first, they refused to speak, shaking their heads and muttering that some things were better left buried. But her persistence wore them down. One elder, Baba Chinedu, sighed heavily and told her that the tree was not just any tree. Its roots were entwined with an old story of betrayal and blood, a story the younger generation no longer remembered. If she wished to save her grandson, she would need to confront not only the whispers, but the very past that had been locked away in silence. Mama Adaku rose from that conversation with a new fire in her spirit. Fear still gnawed at her heart, but now it was joined by purpose. If the tree carried secrets, she would uncover them, no matter how dark. For Ife's sake, she was willing to walk into the shadows of history, armed only with her love and her refusal to surrender. And so, the path of desperation became the path of courage, guiding her toward truths that had long been hidden beneath the soil, where the tree's roots drank deep. Baba Chinedu sat before Mama Adaku, his wrinkled face illuminated by the glow of a flickering oil lamp. His voice was heavy, as though each word carried the weight of generations, and at first he hesitated, glancing around as if unseen ears might be listening. Then, with a long sigh, he began to tell the story that most of the elders had sworn never to repeat. Long ago, when the village was still young, there had been a bitter conflict over land. Two clans had lived side by side, sharing the soil and the river, until greed poisoned their hearts. One clan sought to take more than what was theirs, and in their hunger for power, they betrayed their neighbors in the dead of night. The betrayal was marked not just by thefts, but by blood. For the strongest men and women of the rival clan were cut down as they slept. The survivors, broken and grieving, fled into the hills. But before they left, they placed a curse upon the land. They called upon the spirits of the ancestors, declaring that the ground where their kin had been slaughtered would never know peace. The bodies of the fallen were buried hastily beneath a massive tree, its roots drinking from their blood, and from that day forward the tree grew unnaturally strong, its trunk thickening and its branches spreading wide. It was said that their spirits remained restless, bound to the tree, whispering into the world of the living. For many years, the whispers were faint, dismissed as stories told to frighten children. But every few generations, the curse awoke, and the voices grew louder. Baba Chinedu explained that those chosen by the tree were not random. The whispers were believed to call the names of those whose lives were somehow tied to the sins of the past, though no one had ever understood the full pattern. Some believed the tree demanded balance, that it claimed lives to repay an ancient debt. Others believed it was anger, an eternal hunger for justice, never satisfied. Mama Adaku listened with her heart pounding. The story chilled her, but it also gave her clarity. The deaths in the village were not accidents of nature, nor the cruelty of chance. They were echoes of betrayal, the reaching hands of a curse too long ignored. She asked Baba Chinedu why the villagers had never destroyed the tree, and his answer made her blood run cold. Because the last time they tried, he said, the whispers did not stop. Instead, they grew louder, and the earth shook until fire broke from the ground. Many lives were lost, and the people swore never to touch the tree again. When the tale ended, silence pressed between them. Mama Adaku felt both fear and determination stirring inside her. Ife was innocent, untouched by the sins of the past, yet his name had been called. That meant the curse no longer cared who was guilty or blameless. She rose from her seat, knowing that if the past could not be undone, then perhaps there was another way, a way to silence the whispers without destroying the tree. The elders had hidden in fear, but she would not. She would face the curse head-on, for the love of her grandson demanded nothing less. The story of the ancestors weighed heavily on Mama Adaku's heart, but it also planted a seed of resolve. If the whispers were tied to restless spirits, then perhaps there was a way to calm them. She remembered fragments of old prayers her mother had taught her in childhood, words meant to ease the passage of souls and bring peace to the forgotten dead. Combined with what Baba Chinedu had revealed, she began to weave together a plan, a ritual that might silence the tree. It was a desperate idea, but desperation was all she had left. For days, she gathered what she needed in secret. She walked to the river at dawn to collect pure water, carried palm fronds from the shrine at the edge of the village, and took white cloth she had hidden in her chest since her youth. Each step was taken with trembling hands, for she knew many would call her mad if they saw. Yet her heart told her she was not acting in folly, but in love. When Ife asked why she was moving so strangely, she smiled and told him only that she was preparing to fight for him. At night, while others slept, Mama Adaku rehearsed the words she would speak. Ancient prayers, whispered through trembling lips. She knelt by the ashes of her hearth and practiced laying the cloth on the ground as if it were an offering bed. She knew the ritual had to be performed under the moon, for the voices were strongest when darkness cloaked the village. Some part of her feared that the tree would strike her down before she could finish, yet another part believed that the spirits of the wronged would hear her and find rest. The night of the ritual came heavy with silence. The villagers stayed inside their huts. Shutters closed tight, for even they felt the air thick with something unseen. Mama Adaku wrapped herself in a faded shawl and carried Ive's small wooden carving, his favorite toy since childhood, as her offering of innocence. She walked slowly to the tree, her heart hammering, but her steps steady, each one an act of defiance against fear. When she reached the wide roots, she spread the white cloth across the ground, poured river water over it, and laid the carving gently in the center. Then, she lifted her arms toward the branches and began to chant. Her voice trembled at first, but with each word, it grew stronger. She called upon the ancestors, upon the spirits of the slain, upon the unseen who lingered in the bark and roots. She begged them to accept peace, to release their anger, to let go of the living. The whispers began to rise, circling through the branches, louder and sharper than she had ever heard. It was as though the tree was mocking her attempt. But Mama Adaku did not falter. She pressed her forehead to the earth, her tears soaking the white cloth, and continued the ritual until her voice cracked with strain. The wind swelled suddenly, rushing through the village, carrying her words into the night. For a moment, the whispers clashed with her prayer, the two sounds twisting together in the darkness. Then, just as her strength began to fail, there came a stillness. The voices fell silent, the branches stilled, and the air grew calm. Mama Adaku lifted her head slowly, her chest heaving with exhaustion, her eyes straining to see. For the first time in many moons, the tree gave no reply. The silence was so complete that it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. She had dared to face the curse, and for that brief moment, it seemed as though she had won. The silence that followed the ritual spread like ripples through the village. At dawn, when no new whispers had come, people stepped out of their huts cautiously, as though testing the air itself. For the first time in weeks, children played near their doorways, and the elders sat together without their usual fearful glances toward the tree. Some even dared to hope that Mama Adaku's prayers had worked, though none spoke of it aloud, for they feared naming her bravery might draw the spirit's attention once more. But Mama Adaku knew the fight was not finished. Silence did not always mean peace. It could mean waiting. That night she remained awake, listening to every creak and sigh of the wind. Ive slept uneasily beside her, turning on his mat with quiet whimpers, and she stroked his hair, whispering that he was safe. Yet deep within her, a voice warned that the tree was not done. It had tasted his name. It would not release him so easily. As the moon climbed high, the old woman rose, took her shawl, and walked alone to the edge of the village, where the tree loomed against the night sky. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of earth and leaves. The branches swayed, though no breeze touched them, and the silence that had felt like victory now pressed down like a weight upon her chest. She stepped forward, her bare feet against the cool soil, until she stood before the wide trunk. Its bark seemed darker than before, its twisted roots reaching outward like gnarled fingers. She placed her hand upon it, her palm trembling as though she were touching something alive. "You will not take him," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. "You have taken enough." At first nothing stirred, then a low groan rose from deep within the trunk, not unlike the creak of wood under strain, yet layered with something more, a sound almost human, as if the tree itself were answering her. The whispers began again, faint but unmistakable, curling through the branches like smoke. They did not speak a name this time. They were angry, restless, the murmurs of voices long denied. Mama Adaku's knees weakened, but she stood firm, clutching the small string of beads she had carried since girlhood. She began to pray aloud, calling not only on the ancestors, but on the mercy of God, begging for protection over Ife, and for the release of the bound souls within the tree. The branches shuddered violently, leaves shaking as though caught in a storm. Though the air around her was still, the sound swelled until it filled her ears, her head, her very bones, but she did not stop. She pressed her forehead against the bark and cried out her final plea, pouring her love for her grandson into every word. The whispers grew sharper, louder, 100 voices clamoring at once, until suddenly they broke off in a single gasp. Then came silence, true silence. The tree stood motionless, its shadow heavy in the moonlight, its voice stilled. Mama Adaku staggered back, her chest rising and falling, tears streaming down her face. She had confronted the tree, faced its fury, and demanded it release her grandson's fate. But in the hollow quiet, she knew this battle had left a mark. Something had shifted between her and the ancient curse. The tree had not spoken Ife's name again, but she felt it had not surrendered, it had only retreated, watching, waiting for its moment to return. For days after Mama Adaku's confrontation, the village lived in uneasy calm. The children played again, the market bustled, and life seemed to find its rhythm. Yet beneath every smile lingered the memory of what had been silenced. No one dared to ask how long the peace would last. At night, families barred their doors tighter, straining their ears for the dreaded sound. But the tree remained quiet, its branches swaying with the wind like any other. Some began to believe the curse had finally ended, whispering thanks for the courage of the old woman who had stood against the darkness. Mama Adaku, however, never allowed herself such comfort. She kept Ife close, watching him with eyes sharpened by both love and fear. Every cough, every stumble, every restless dream stirred panic in her chest. She knew that curses as old as the tree did not simply vanish. They buried themselves deep, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Yet she also knew that fear could not be allowed to rule forever. If the spirits returned, she would meet them again, armed not with strength, but with the unyielding love that had carried her this far. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, If ran to her side, with a wide grin, holding a small bird he had rescued from a broken nest. Mama Adaku's heart swelled with pride and relief. Life still had its sweetness, even in the shadow of death. She lifted the boy into her arms and kissed his forehead, whispering a prayer of protection over him. For the first time in many weeks, she let herself laugh, a sound that seemed to push back the weight of fear that had haunted them. That night, under a full moon, the village lay still. No one heard a whisper, no one stirred in dread, and for a moment the world seemed healed. But deep in the roots of the ancient tree, something lingered. The silence was not emptiness, but waiting. And just as the first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, a sound stirred within the bark, a faint murmur, a breath on the wind. This time, it did not call a name, nor did it cry in anger. It whispered softly, almost lovingly, as though remembering. Mama Adaku woke with a shiver, her eyes darting toward the window where the branches swayed against the morning sky. She pulled Ife close, clutching him to her chest. She did not know if the tree had been silenced forever, or if it was only gathering strength for the day it would speak again. But she knew one thing with certainty. No curse, no whisper, no shadow of death would ever be stronger than a grandmother's love. And so, the tree stood in silence, ancient and watching, its secret buried within the roots of the earth. The villagers carried on with their lives, yet in their hearts, they always wondered when the next whisper might come and whose name it would carry. For though the tree was quiet, the story of its whispers would never truly end.